Hello, my name is Blaine Williams. I'm Assistant Manager of the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County. And what I wanted to share with you today is a model policy-making process as I see it, and whether or not your city's process could stand any improvement. Now, what I mean by a policy-making process is any action taken by the Mayor and Commission or Mayor and Council in their legislative function, but not including zoning actions, and I'll describe that here shortly. Before I begin, I'd like to walk you through a series of questions that will help you self-assess perhaps how optimal your policy-making process is in your city. So what I'd like you to do is follow with me and jot down how many of these statements apply to your city's process so that we can see where you are. First, do commissioners receive identical information at exactly the same time? Number two, can the commissioner or someone from the public understand the issue and the recommended action with very little background or expertise in that area? Number three, beyond meeting minutes, does your process retain a thorough history of the issue, allowing others in the future to go back and quickly understand what's transpired? Number four, is there a clear opportunity for an unvarnished staff recommendation? Number five, is there a clear opportunity for the Commission to suggest their own option for action in full sight of each other and the public? Number six, does your process provide a very specific and detailed direction for staff implementation of a Commission action? And finally, does your process allow commissioners to give feedback in a methodical manner in the concept and design of major infrastructure or building projects? I think you generally agree that these statements would be characteristic of an optimal policy development process. And if you haven't checked many or all of these statements, then your process could stand some improvement, and the rest of this webinar I hope you find helpful. The purpose of my presentation today is twofold. First, to contrast the Unified Government Athens-Clarke County's policy development process with what I believe to be more representative of other cities and counties in Georgia. And secondly, the longer-term goal is to try to bring some uniformity to the way that local governments approach policy development through making it more transparent, easily understandable, and relevant to the general public. I would suggest to you that creating a more transparent policy development process can help you in several ways. First off, it will not only make your life easier in the long run, but it can help make the council-manager relationship more stable. And it can help to engender long-term trust in the local government with the citizens and the media. And all of this in the face of a climate where there's a reluctance to invest in infrastructure and government services, and really just a general distrust of local government in general. So what I'd like to do now is first review a typical policy process as you might find across the state, contrast the process that we use here at Athens-Clarke County, walk you through the key ingredient to this, and that is the agenda item or agenda report, tell you about different meeting formats that we hold here, and finally walk you through our project development process. So my experience with the typical policy development process, and I've worked at several local governments in Georgia, from a citizen's perspective, it's a seemingly mysterious and closed process. It's not very intuitive to the average person or average citizen how things get done at City Hall. From a commissioner's perspective, and this is particularly true of newer commissioners, they may not feel that they have enough influence or provide enough direction in the policy development process as perhaps some longer serving commissioners or more closely aligned commissioners. From a clerk's perspective, he or she could often receive different information from the mayor and the manager, and makes it very difficult to understand how you go about setting the agenda. And from a manager's perspective, you have to be extremely vigilant to make sure that all the commissioners, the mayor and commission, receive the same information. And for those that may not have the capacity to understand an issue, if it's fairly technical, making sure that they do understand, or that they were paying attention. So I'd like to walk you through what might be a typical process. It may not look like yours. You may use committees, but this is something I've found in the past to be true of both a city and a county. and see if this sounds like yours. So first, you're getting emails, phone calls from the department directors. They're stopping you in the hallway. There's the last minute hair on fire. We have to take care of this right now for commission action, which makes the manager's life very difficult. So the manager does his or her best to try to compile supporting information to help make a case to the commission about action, and then sits down with the clerk to develop a draft agenda. There may be an agenda setting session with the mayor and a rotating commissioner to finalize the agenda. And then once that agenda is set, the manager starts his first round of phone calls to all the commissioners to try to explain to them what the issues are. And then the commissioners, once they've had time to digest this, they'll call the manager back with different comments and perhaps different direction that the manager then has to struggle with how to alter how the recommendation is going to go. Then there's the second round of phone calls once the manager's figured out which way he or she is going to update them on where the policy has landed. There may be a work session, there may be new commission questions, whether it's just genuine interest or grandstanding, and then finally a voting meeting immediately following the work session. So that could be a typical policy development process in Georgia. And it gives it lets several situations arise, and I'll give you a few examples. There could be that the manager recommended a 1% raise for the employees, and this was communicated privately through private conversations with the commissioners. And the Friday before the work session where we talked about this, the commission was given a draft email, an email with a draft budget that said, "This is what we're contemplating." So you have members of the public and you have the media who are not privy to these private conversations or that email, and one commissioner who has continually disagreed with that approach the whole time acts as if they had no prior knowledge of this, and so that confuses everybody in the room. Or another situation could be where during pre-meeting work sessions, the mayor, who disagrees with staff recommendation, walks commissioners out one by one into the hallway while citizens and the media are sitting there present, and tries to persuade them to see the issue his or her way. Meetings might be short, your voting meetings, where most of the work was done in a previous work session that wasn't well attended by the public, and when the manager tries to explain to the public and the televised audience a little bit more detail so they understand the context, that might be frowned upon by some commissioners. These aren't optimal situations, and when you're communicating in a verbal fashion and varying levels of detail to folks with varying levels of capacity to understand, the opportunity for confusion is there, and it's very difficult. So what kind of position do these situations put you in, and how does all this look to the general public? I would submit that there is a better way to do this. Now, I came to the unified government, and I'm going to describe the process to you, but here is what I want for you to take away from this, and what I think is very important. You're providing commissioners information needed to take policy action. They need to be able to make a decision. Identical information is received simultaneously that is comprehensive, yet should be able to be understood by someone with virtually no history or background with the issue. It allows time for thoughtful questions from the commission, is concurrently used to inform the public, it creates a specific issue history for future leaders to come, it gives staff the opportunity to offer a clear recommendation, and a process for the commission to provide a different option in plain sight of all the other commissioners, and it provides for very specific direction for staff implementation. The agenda report represents a formal communication between staff and elected officials, the general public, and the media. It requests a decision or guidance from the commission. So I'd like to share with you a sample agenda report and walk you through the sections and explain to you why they're relevant. And this is a agenda report that refers to parking restrictions that were taken, but you can use this agenda report for any number of issues, whether it's approval of leases, award of bid, the alteration of ordinances or amendment of ordinances. Any number of things can be used in this manner. Now if you look at the top section, the introduction, it has a subject and date. It has budget information and a funding source, and that's important, particularly on if you're doing any big capital projects that have some operational implications. There is a very specific commission action requested date. The commissioner can look right there and understand that this is coming to the voting meeting in February. And there's a section indicating whether this is a recommendation, policy discussion, status report, or other in the top right-hand corner. The purpose is very important and lets the commissioner, mayor, and commission know exactly what they're being asked to do. It's a lead-in summary of issues that indicate requested action, and it lets them know what you're asking them to consider without stating your position. The history section is important as well. It provides background information in chronological order up to the present date. It provides relevant facts to frame the discussion and answers the question, what has happened up to this point? And what's been particularly useful in the history section is if there's been any prior mayor and commission action that lets them know what they did or some previous mayor and commission, the action that's been taken or the precedent that's been set. Going down to the bottom and going on to the second page is facts and issues. Now this provides existing relevant facts not covered in the history section. And most importantly, it anticipates questions from commissioners and provides answers. As a manager, you know some of the questions or the line of questioning that certain commissioners may take. And it can cause confusion and uncertainty if you get a barrage of questions on the floor. And so you think in advance, well, what might I be asked about that? And you try to cover that in facts and issues. And in this section as well, you provide the pros and cons for multiple alternatives. You can include detailed information that is clear and helps with the understanding of the report. And you're essentially providing the information that the commissioner needs to make a decision. Under options, we always state the recommended action is number one, option number one. And you always have a minimum of 3 options. You approve the recommended action, which is the staff's recommendation. You deny the recommended action, which is the direct opposite. Or you allow the mayor and commission to define an alternative option, which we call commission-defined options, and that happens from time to time. At the very end, the signature indicates that the director has read, agrees, and approves the content. So, now that you've heard a little bit about the merits of the agenda report, as well as how it's constructed, let me walk you through the process of developing that. But I will say this, the agenda report itself can live in different types of processes. You don't have to adhere to the way that we do things here. It can work with committees. The important thing is it is a consistent method of communicating information to the mayor and commission and the public in general. So here's the way that we go through the process. The department director is we depend on the department director to author the agenda report item and submit it to the manager. The manager reviews them and makes comments. We mark up the document, and then we have a session where all submitting directors meets with the manager to review the comments. And we ask that the directors stay through the duration of the meeting, not only to understand some of the other issues facing the unified government, but also as practice on future agenda report writing. Once the manager is finalized and approved the agenda reports, they're submitted to the clerk. The mayor pro tem, the county attorney, the manager, and the clerk all meet to review the tentative agenda. And if the mayor approves, that agenda gets distributed out to the commission along with all the agenda items so that the commission has time to read them in advance. There's an agenda setting meeting held with the commission that's non-voting, but they have the opportunity to ask questions and learn. And it's another opportunity for the public to see all of this in advance of the voting meeting. Based on the feedback from the agenda setting meeting, the clerk finalizes the agenda, and any commission-defined options should be due at this time. It's generally not a good practice for commissioners to surprise the other commissioners with the commission-defined option the day of the voting meeting because they simply don't have time to assimilate the information. And so it's just good practice to have those commission-defined options if the commissioners want to do something different from staff recommendation to the clerk in advance for everybody to review them. And finally, we have our voting meeting where the agenda items are either are approved or denied. Now, This whole process is based on once-a-month voting meeting. The governments I've worked in before usually have 2 voting meetings a month. When I came to Athens-Clarke County, I was concerned about how you could accomplish everything that needs to be done only once a month. But I'm glad to tell you that many of these so-called emergencies that come up at the last minute really can be avoided with some careful planning on the parts of the department directors and the manager. And so a well-organized process can accommodate 1 meeting. But I'm going to explain our process to you. Again, the agenda report can work in any environment, and that's really the most important thing I wanted to convey to you today. But for additional context, I'll share how our process works. There are basically 3 meeting formats. We have a work session early on in the month, and that's reserved for more complex issues that require dialogue with the mayor and commission. There are 2 types of presentations that we allow: those that either require upcoming action or those that are informational only. Staff and consultants make presentations to the manager's office 2 weeks prior to the mayor and commission so that the manager can make sure that the information is not only relevant but presented in a effective fashion. The second part of our process is the agenda setting meeting, which I mentioned. And this is an informal meeting to review items for the voting meeting. There's no binding action, and it affords opportunity to commissioners to ask questions about the agenda items. And finally, we have our voting meeting the first Tuesday of the month, and that is where binding actions are taken. Developing the scope and design of major infrastructure projects can be very detailed and involved. In my past experience, commission interaction with this process came strictly through one of several avenues: either in appropriating the funds for the project, approving the contract for the architect, approving the contract for the contractor, approving change orders for any amount of money, or taking a keen interest in the project and trying to influence the outcome. And it's very difficult, again, when you have commissioners that have varying levels of technical expertise, to afford them the opportunity to participate and feel like that they were able to shape the project development process. And I'd like to share with you what we do here in Athens-Clarke County in the hopes it will be useful to you. And so here at Athens-Clarke County, our project development process begins with a project concept approval. And that is where we take to the mayor and commission the general idea of what we're trying to accomplish with the project. And that comes to them initially in the form of a work session. And we'll have 10 to 15 minute presentation about what's trying to be achieved. And we'll get some feedback from them at that point. More importantly, an agenda item comes forth that explains what was presented and incorporates any consensual feedback we get from the commission. And at that point, they either approve, deny, or change it. But that is a milestone. We have a concept that's got the approval of the mayor and commission. And in that agenda item, staff is given direction to proceed to schematic design. And if you don't know what schematic design is, that's simply, bringing the design of the project into a little more focus. And that usually takes a few months. And then we return to them in another work session and explain to them where we've advanced to and allow them the opportunity to give feedback at that point. And then an agenda item comes forth from there. So at each point, you're getting tacit commission approval on how this project is evolving. Once they approve that schematic design, they also give staff direction to advance to contract award. And a bid's put out and returned back to them in the form of an agenda item, and they approve the award of the contract. After that, any ensuing change orders over certain amounts, we have some administrative approval. But otherwise, if it goes beyond that threshold, we return to them with an agenda item. And as you've seen in this format, it gives the history, it explains the facts and issues, and allows them to make an educated discussion or decision. Now, I will mention that in schematic design, we do offer commissioners the ability to go down to a finer grain of information, and we break out certain characteristics of the project, and we put them in different categories so that they can understand and reprioritize if they have a different thought than staff. And those 3 categories are must have, or highly wanted, or nice to have. And you can see the progression of priority there. So again, regardless of your process schedule, the number of voting meetings that you have a month, or your city's use of committees, the agenda report is a valuable tool. Again, it provides identical information. It should be able to be understood by someone with virtually no history or background. It allows for thoughtful questions. It helps to inform the public. It provides a specific issue history. It gives staff the opportunity to offer a clear recommendation. And it offers the commission the opportunity to offer a different option. And it provides specific direction for staff to step away from that policy-making process and operationalize what the wish of the mayor and commission are. So that comprises our project development process, our policy-making process here, and really the takeaway I'd like to share with y'all is the agenda report. I think that every local government in Georgia, city or county, could benefit from this, and it would help to engender long-term trust in those folks that elect the mayor and commission, our citizens.